mosquitoes and worms, bacteria and mushrooms, oaks and flamingos, whales, lotuses and capybaras. Before anything, I'm just trying to paint on your minds the colors of this session. An ecosystem's strength resides in its diversity. And today, we're strong, here at Change Now and here at Collective Stage. We've been celebrating the 10 years of the Paris Agreement. We're still hanging on to it. Unfortunately, things have evolved a bit. And we're not only thinking about a climate-focused only approach, but we're trying to take into account every aspect of our connection to nature and to the living. I'm Jimena Morales Velasco, and today we'll explore how to tackle biodiversity loss and engage decision-making actors and civil society in the protection of all kinds of ecosystems. With no further ado, it's an honor for me to introduce the opening speaker of this session, the youngest speaker at Change Now 2025, India's youngest fruit forest creator, and youngest delegate at the UNFCCC, the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, 12-year-old environmentalist and author, Prasiddhi Singh. Please give her a warm welcome. The stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? All good? Yes? So just to normalize a little bit before I get started, I'm going to say change and... Oh, thank you. I'm going to say change, and you're going to say now, OK? We'll just do it 3 times. Change? 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 Amazing. Brilliant. So it's about... Can I have my presentation? Brilliant. I'm Prasiddhi, and I don't know how many of you know about Zen Alpha, but that's the generation after Gen Z. And I come from that because I'm 12 years old. And it's a beautiful Saturday, and it's about 3:20 or so right now at Paris, at the Change Now Summit. And now you might be thinking, why am I telling the time? The reason is, at the very same time, somewhere high above the bustling lanes of Mumbai, India, lives a little girl named Anaya, who's leaning over the balcony of a 25th floor apartment. And her eyes go on a rose-ringed parakeet, looking straight at her. She wonders where it might go next, but at that very same time, her elder sister calls from the living room. Netflix binge time, and that very moment, she forgets the bird and goes inside. At the same time, up high in Norway, Tromsø, where it's also 3:20 p.m., a little boy in woolen socks named Jonas is pressing his nose to a frosted window, looking at the melting snow reveal green moss and frozen berries. He wonders about it, and he grabs his mittens to run outside, but his elder brother is already saying, "Come help me film this new reel," and he stays back inside as well. Meanwhile, in New York City, USA, where an 8-year-old girl named Alizée is riding in the back seat of her cab, staring at the sycamore trees shredding their golden leaves. She wonders and asks, how do trees know when to let go? But her father couldn't answer because he was talking deep in a meeting in his mobile phone. And her question is left unanswered. And finally, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where it's 10:30 a.m., Mateo sits quietly by the riverbank, building boats from banana leaves, imagining the fish below and the wind above. Before he could continue, her aunt from the porch says, "While your show's starting, let's switch on the tablet." He hesitates for a bit and goes inside. Across different countries, time zones, and languages, children pause. They connect, they notice, and they wonder with nature, even if just for a single moment. But something pulls them away. Not because they don't care, but because the world around them doesn't care enough. You say you want to raise a generation that will look after the planet, but are you teaching us a life that lives with the planet? The truth is simple. We as children don't learn from what you say. We learn from what you do. And remember, as children, we don't need to be taught how to love nature. We are born with that love. What we need is the permission to keep it. Across all the 4 stories, whether it was Alia, Matteo, Jonas, or Anaya, they all had a deep connection with biodiversity. Because whether it was the rose-ringed parakeet, the sycamore tree, the frozen berries, or the banana leaves, nature has been, us as children, our best friends since the very beginning. And that's when I come to think about it, that what are we actually doing to our planet? For centuries now, ever since it was first created in the year 1934 by Simon Kuznets, our only definition of success has been GDP, gross domestic product growth. It has been the way we define our planet. It has been our long-defined way of doing that. And here's what happened. Forests have fallen, oceans have risen, temperatures have surged, all in the name of so-called progress. But imagine a world where success is not defined by what we extract, but by what we restore. Where a flourishing forest counts more than a fossil fuel fortune. Where thriving societies, circular economies, biodiversity, and empowered communities matter more than quarterly profits. This is redefining success, the need of the hour. Because this shift isn't a dream, it's a necessity, something we all need deeply. Success is a child growing up without inhaling smoke. Its communities thriving. It's a planet that lives happily and in coexistence with nature. For me, I think that for way too long, adults have defined success with wealth and control, power and competition. Maybe, just maybe, to save our future, we need to see our planet from a child's eyes. We need to look at it differently. And to do that, let me plug in a small documentary created by National Geographic about my journey. Can we have the video, please?
Sunday is my favorite day of the week. हम सुबह सुबह सब्जी मंडी जाते हैं। मेरे पेरेंट्स तो यहाँ इसलिए आते हैं क्योंकि फ्रूट्स एंड वेजिटेबल्स यहाँ पे बहुत ही फ्रेश मिलते हैं। पर मेरी जिद कुछ और है। वो कहते हैं कि बच्चों को बेकार की जिद नहीं करनी चाहिए, पर हम मानने वाले कहाँ।
ग्रीटिंग्स, नमस्ते एंड वनक्कम। मेरा नाम प्रसिद्धि सिंह है। मैं 10 साल की हूँ और मैंने ठान लिया है कि मैं इस प्लैनेट को प्रोटेक्ट करूँगी।
कुछ 6-7 साल पहले की बात है, तब शायद मैं किंडरगार्टन में पढ़ती थी। एक दिन सुबह उठी तो बहुत जोर से हवा चल रही थी। मम्मी ने बोला आज स्कूल नहीं जाना है, आज साइक्लोन आ रहा है, स्कूल्स, ऑफिसेस सब बंद है। पहले तो मैं बहुत खुश हुई कि आज पूरा दिन घर में मस्ती। लेकिन फिर मैं सोचने लगी, जिन लोगों के पास घर नहीं है वो कहाँ जाएंगे? ये जानवर, ये बर्ड्स, ये सब लोग क्या करेंगे?
साइक्लोन के जाने के बाद मैंने देखा कि कुछ पेड़ जैसे कि आम, कोकोनट और नीम वो तब भी स्ट्रॉन्ग खड़े रहे।
फिर मैं समझी कि जो नेटिव पेड़ है, इनकी रूट्स बहुत डीप जाती हैं और ये पेड़ एक नेचुरल बैरियर बन जाते हैं। फिर बस मिल गया इन साइक्लोन से बचने का एक रास्ता। फिर जब मैं 6 साल की हुई तो मैंने ठान लिया कि मैं पेड़ लगाऊंगी। 1 नहीं, 2 नहीं, पूरे 1 लाख पेड़ लगाऊंगी और इस प्लैनेट को ग्रीन बनाऊंगी। लेकिन क्या बड़े लोग एक 6 साल की बच्ची की बात सुनेंगे? हाँ क्यों नहीं, अगर वो बच्ची जिद पे उतर आए तो जरूर सुनूंगी। ये तो एक शुरुआत है, धीरे धीरे चारों तरफ ट्री प्लांटेशंस करवाने, पूरे वर्ल्ड में। मुझे कई बार लोगों ने बोला कि पढ़ाई और फ्यूचर पे ध्यान दो, पर क्या ये पेड़ मेरा फ्यूचर नहीं है? वो कहते हैं कि बच्चों को बेकार की जिद नहीं करनी चाहिए, पर मेरी ये छोटी सी जिद ही तो मेरी सबसे बड़ी ताकत है।
So that was a little bit about my journey, and because it was in Hindi, let me also tell you myself a little bit about it. I'm 12 years old, and I have not just come here as a speaker, but as a curious child who dares to ask questions and never stops listening to nature. Yes, that's how I would like to tell about myself. From always, since a very young age, I know, I'm still young, but since the very beginning, I have always loved nature, whether it was admiring the local Indian Jezebel butterflies on our periwinkle flowers, or admiring the Bay of Bengal's waves, or this is a picture of me near our local golden shower tree enjoying a flower shower. Nature has been my best friend and my biggest source of inspiration. But in the year 2016, when Varda cyclone hit the shore of Tamil Nadu, India, where I live, the impacts were so dramatic because it didn't just uproot trees, it uprooted my dear green friends. But instead of fear, I found a question inside me. What can I do for Prakriti Mama? Prakriti Mama is my way of calling Mother Nature. And while others moved on, I decided to participate in tree plantation drives. And I did that. I learned from experts, I learned from villagers about traditional techniques, and I did it myself. And after doing it for 2 good years, at the age of 6, in the year 2018 came a turning point when I decided that I want to plant 100,000 trees. Yes, 100,000. There was actually this person who said, Prasiddhi, do you even know how many zeros are there in that? That was how I started, but I had already begun, so I didn't really care. The truth is that my journey as a young environmentalist has never been easy. Because often people till today underestimate me and say that I'm too young to make a difference. I imagined things, I wanted to do things, and often they didn't happen the way I wanted it to work out. But here's the thing about me. While I felt too small in a world that was too big for me to change, I've been a problem solver. So when I saw that children, schools, rural schools in rural areas were lacking access to climate education, I decided that I will create green brigades, yes, in all the schools, where I gave each child a sapling and also hands-on training in their local language, and even created native fruit forests in their school compounds. And it wasn't just my project. I got a policy letter enacted by the authority in the entire region, and it has already started in 200 plus rural schools. When I saw that farmers, either because of poverty or migration or lack of knowledge, were struggling in their farming practices, I decided to support them through sustainable farming practices. I decided to do agroforestry with them. And through this, I have empowered more than 5,000 plus villagers and farmers, some of them through plantation, others through livelihood, some through education or eco-solutions, making a huge difference on the rural level. After the cyclone, I'm also a very good observer, okay? And I'm looking at all of you, who is listening, who is not listening, who is looking at the phone, who is paying attention. So after the cyclone, I noticed something striking, that the trees which survived were all indigenous native trees. And that's when I decided I will not plant ornamental trees in the name of so-called greening. I will plant trees that actually support biodiversity. And with that, I started restoring forests, planting these trees. And the results speak for themselves. In areas once barren or damaged, I saw nature returning back. Birds, bees, butterflies coming back. You can see a picture over here. This land was actually an industrial patch. And I restored it despite many of the local people saying nothing will grow over here. And today it stands as a huge support system forest for the entire surrounding. And this is just one of the many 100+ places I have regenerated through nature-based solution projects, whether it is agroforestry, lake restoration, mangrove plantation, butterfly gardens, or indigenous tree plantations, empowering and creating a world towards my big dream of a better future. Throughout my journey, there has been something very special. Whenever I would look at a flower or just stop in the middle of walking just to see a little bug or a frog jumping and doing like this, my parents never stopped me. They never distracted me with a phone or sent me off to another class. They gave me the opportunity to continue to connect with nature, and that is what made my bond unbreakable, a bond through which I have been able to continue on this journey of mine. So yes, I planted a tree, then another, and another. What started as a simple mission has now grown into forests, future, and hope. And fast forward to 2025, since that first sapling, I have planted 150,000 trees. In 110 locations and mobilized 80,000 people across 20 countries. Thank you. And this is not just my story. This is the story of every single child who believes in a kinder world, every bee, every river, every mountain, and every forest that gives without asking for anything in return. In my opinion, when we redefine success from the eyes of a child, we begin to value life over luxury. And nowhere is this more important than in how we view biodiversity. Let's be clear, biodiversity isn't a sidekick in this climate saga. It is the main plot. Biodiversity is the very heartbeat of our planet that manages this interconnected balance of all living beings on Earth. And in India, this thrives in our beautiful forests, grasslands, rivers, and mountains. But slowly, these species are vanishing and taking little pieces of ecosystems that my generation or my future generations will never be able to see. Whether it is the great Indian bustard of the grasslands, or if it is the shy red panda of the Himalayas, if it is the lion-tailed macaque of the Western Ghats, or the Ganga River dolphin that makes our ecosystem whole. Every species, though endangered today, is an important part of our planet's puzzle. And their survival is not separate from ours. It is important that we look after them and that we protect them, because biodiversity in today's world is depleting faster than ever. And I feel that this is no longer just an adult problem. It is a human problem. It is a problem now. And children have a powerful role to play in this journey. Obviously, only if you give us a chance, that is, and you stop underestimating our potential. So if you give us an opportunity, we can make a difference, not alone, but together. And I am not waiting to grow up to make change. I'm already leading it, planting forests, empowering communities, spreading the message, learning from the wild, and giving back to it wherever I can. And now I've taken on an even bolder, even bigger, even more ambitious mission. You know what? You want to know about it? Yes. My mission now is to plant 10 million trees. Yes, I know. And trust me, I did 100,000, and I believe, not just in myself, but in Prakriti Mama, Mother Nature, that I'll be able to do it. But guess what? I don't just like to talk and just speak and tell people. I want you to do something. And here's a way you can support me in my mission of planting 10 million trees. Recently, I launched my very new book. It is an illustrated storybook, Prasiddhi's Amazon Rainforest Adventure, that takes you through one of the world's richest ecosystem. It is told by a young explorer with a big dream. And this is a beautiful book. I launched it with the Ministry of Tourism Brazil at COP29. And every book you buy, here's the best part about it. Every book you buy, I will plant one tree for you. So, will you all take it? Yes? Will you all support me in my mission? Look, they already have a copy over there. They're discussing about it. A lot of you already, yes, see? A lot of you already have the copies, and I can't wait for all of those who've missed the opportunity. Quickly grab it before the event concludes. It's right here. An opportunity to support me in my mission. And that's not it. Wait a minute. Change Now has partnered with Prasiddhi Forest Foundation to plant one tree on behalf of each speaker. Yes, one tree on behalf of each speaker. I think that deserves a huge round of applause. Because Change Now isn't just giving a platform to young change makers like me. It is also working towards a real rooted solution, creating impact on the ground. And now, I would like to finally conclude by reciting a poem that I've created that gives you a perspective of redefining success from the eyes of a child. And here it goes. The name of the poem is Prakriti Mama Knows, So Why Don't We? A quick reminder, Prakriti is a Sanskrit word which means nature. So let's do it. Birds don't need passports to fly through the sky. So why do we build borders so high? Trees don't wear watches to know when to grow. So why do we rush wherever we go? The sun gives its warmth at no fee at all. So why is clean energy such a tall call? Mountains don't boast, yet they quietly rise. So why do we measure worth merely through size? Bees don't need permission to dance and to share. So why do we limit those who get to care? Our nature is beautiful. Rain doesn't divide. Rain doesn't fall just on one side. So why do we let wealth divide? Let's hold the earth like a friend, not a prize. Redefine success with imagination. That's right, to make a future even more bright. If you just watched, you too might see the world was meant to live simply. If you just watched, you too might see the world was meant to live simply. Thank you, and namaste from India.
Thank you very much, Prasiddhi, for these inspiring words. We hope really to see many of you in this year's coming, and it just fills the air with hope to see this generation being so conscious and determined to make a difference. Thank you. Please, dear audience, Prasiddhi Singh. To continue our discussion, and as solutions are at the core of action, I'm inviting my guest who will show how science, local initiatives, entrepreneurship intersect and contribute to make this fight stronger. Please welcome Alizée Ruel of Flamingo, Hannah Schragmann representing Soilytix, and Olivier Dirt from Wildia. Please join me on stage. welcome. How are you doing all today? Alizée, Ruel, you're initially an engineer. You're now the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Flamingo. When we thought of biodiversity some years ago, we usually thought of birds and flowers and trees, but that is changing. And now we know there is much more to it, thanks to actions and commitments like yours. Tell us about Flamingo and why you decide to work specifically with wetlands.
Good morning, everyone. So, I'm really happy to be here and to talk about these amazing wetlands today. So, the thing about wetlands is that if I ask you to picture a wetland in your mind, you may see like a muddy place with some mosquitoes or home of dangerous place. And that's not only that. It's like really critical and vital for our survival, for biodiversity. And I will give you two numbers to help you realize that. The first one is 6%. So wetlands are covering 6% of the Earth's surface. And in this 6%, they are home to 40% of all the species living in the world. So, I mean, all the frogs are depending on wetlands, half the birds, the flamingo, the egrets, some plants, they are using wetlands to reproduce, to grow, to feed. So we cannot preserve biodiversity if we do not preserve wetlands. And the thing that a few knows, and maybe nobody knows, is that we are destroying them, and they are today disappearing 3 times faster than forests. So this is the reason why we decided to create Flamingo and to throw all our energy into saving them and finding solutions to finance them in a more bigger way that we are doing right now.
Thank you for that. And for you to know, we're going to be speaking a little bit more about wetlands with almost all speakers. But I want to go to Hannah Schragmann. You're Soilytix Chief Biodiversity Officer, and you've got a thorough experience working with sustainability, ecology, and economics. Throughout the course of this conversation, we will dive into the ways biodiversity can be effectively protected, and one of them might be Soilytix. And through a very innovative process, you're actually decoding soil DNA. Tell us how you're doing that and why it is so important to focus on soil to tackle the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis.
Yes, thank you so much. I think what's really important to understand is that to really protect biodiversity, we need to understand it. We need to really understand the mechanisms for it and understand also its importance. And what's really interesting is that with new technology, we can basically get a new picture of the biodiversity under our feet. So using environmental DNA, we can decode the whole genetic material that we find in the environment and really then understand how this biodiversity not just looks like in terms of how many species are present, but how it actually functions, how the species are working together. And we basically can analyze environmental DNA from air, from water, from everywhere. But we at Soilytix, we focus on the soil because basically 50% of all the world's biodiversity is hosted by soils. But we often, when we speak about biodiversity, we speak about the beautiful mammals, about elephants, etc. But basically, every above ground biodiversity that we see is, finds its basis in below ground biodiversity. And what's also really interesting is that the soil is a real data treasure chest. Because very often, if we, for example, restore an ecosystem, we can see the effects of the changes, like species returning, only years afterwards above ground. But the soil microbiome, so all these tiny organisms that live in the soil, they react super quickly to changes and to land management changes. So you can early on also see if your restoration activity has success. And already what Alizée said, when you look at soil, 40% of our world's soils are degraded at the moment, threatening the very biodiversity that sustains us, and that's mainly due to intensive agricultural activity. And we need to start to safeguard that. We've been speaking a lot about in the last days about basically projections around climate, around biodiversity loss, but not so much about the topic of land degradation. So we need to start restoring land, and we need to start in that sense at what is at the roots, so at the soil.
Thank you very much for that, Hannah. Olivier, Doert, you are a biodiversity builder, Oliver, founder of Wildia, and you've worked championing nature-related entrepreneurship. You're actually creating an ecosystem to make this mission the top priority, right? How are you doing that with Wildia?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're doing this with Wildia because we believe we have enough millionaires. I think we need more impact billionaires. We need crazy people that want to rewild 1 million bison, people that want to restore 1 million corals, people that want to remove 1 million kilograms of plastic trash from the oceans. And what we see right now is there's a really clear gap of, we know how to become a millionaire in theory. There's tons of books and YouTube and movies about it, but there's not so much resources about it if you actually want to create the really positive impact on our world. And what's the blueprint like? Where do I start? What's the first coral? How can I plant the first coral? How can I get attention for my mission? How can I create a sustainable model so that I can actually pay my rent and hopefully get more people embarked in this? And we do this basically through 4 different things. One is awareness creation, because as you all know, biodiversity is still flying under the radar. The second one is creating a community with online events, offline events, because we need to share within our bubble the best practices, the tools, the ways how we can really scale our impact action. The fourth is like boot camps, so attention, and especially how to play the business model, because we need to sustainably finance so that we can scale our impact action. And then we also work on one-to-one basis.
On
one-to-one basis.
One-to-one basis, okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask you all, I'm starting with Hannah, how the work that you're doing with soil measurement, for example, can change the way in which we are addressing the frameworks that the world's been following for biodiversity protection. Maybe you could take us to some examples of Soilytix in action so we understand how you're changing this general paradigm.
That's a great question, and I think what's really important to understand is that often, for example, in agriculture, we look at land thinking about how much yield we can squeeze out. We want to really, in the short run, try to increase agriculture productivity at the sake of the long-term reproductivity of the soil, which will also in the future affect also economically what sort of food we can actually harvest. So we really want to work on this topic and really deep dive into the soil and start also valuing land for its basically parameters like biodiversity, like soil resilience, reproductivity of the soil microbiome with all the important functions that it provides on a daily basis. I think that's super important. For example, we work with nut producers in Portugal that really try to understand how the soil biodiversity drives the sustainable walnut production, and also work with their basically land managers that will change the way they report about land. Not just looking at yield drivers at the moment, but really valuing land for the long-term ability of the soil to provide its ecosystem functions and to sustainably increase yield. And I think that's really important that we start going away from the wrong metrics to the right metrics. And particularly in agriculture, I mean, in the 60s, there was this big green revolution where we started to, get way more efficient. We switched to monocultures. We included a lot of fertilizer to increase production. And still nowadays, when we look at economic metrics, we think, we see in the 60s this huge agricultural productivity increase. But nowadays, the soils, because of that, are degraded. People suffer from mental health issues, from basically cancer because of fertilizer usage. So we need to switch that narrative and really start thinking reproductivity, resilience, soil health, rather than looking at short-term yield. And that's really what we're trying to do, and why we are very happy that also a lot of companies, land managers, also forest owners are realizing we need to move away from this productivity regime and start looking at resilience, and biodiversity is a huge part of resilience.
Thank you. And Alizée, what are these actions being undertaken by Flamingo? We know that you've developed crowdfunding as a tool, but tell us why crowdfunding and what are the overall actions you're undertaking?
Yeah, indeed, we had a crowdfunding platform, but we are not doing only crowdfunding. And we have 2 missions. The first one is to raise awareness on wetlands. And the thing about wetlands is that we have a really misperception about them. So we want to create new stories. We want to show them in a different light, so we can change the perception you might probably have about them, and so that we could preserve them. So this is the first mission, and this is part of the reason why I'm here today at Chant now. And the second mission is to develop like a toolbox to finance wetland projects, because we want to find more tools to finance them far more than the level we are financing them right now. So we choose the crowdfunding as the first one tool, because for us this is the best way to both raise awareness and collect money to help all this scientific working for wetlands restoration, preservation, conservation. But we are also working to offer crowdfunding for companies. So if they have like a CSR strategy and want to support some project with huge biodiversity and climate impact, they can do it. And we hope to mobilize millions on wetlands projects, so we can change.
Yeah, it's good that you say it, because sometimes when we hear, the common human, we hear crowdfunding, you always think about like common people also, and you could ask yourself, why would you ask, the individuals to be the only ones to contribute to that project? So there is also this.
And this is really an important thing to us. Like, we think that the ecological transition, we should all be part of it, every kind of actors, so individuals, but also companies. And this is why it is important to develop some tools for all these kind of actors. And
Sure. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that we will start seeing biodiversity in more and more places with our eyes, not only with the knowledge of it, but also because of the impact our activities are having on our ecosystems. And this is for all stages of consciousness on environmental issues, from politicians to big companies, from entrepreneurs to civil society as individuals. Oliver, this is for you. Could you please tell us how Wildea is contributing to that shift of mindsets concerning the way we address biodiversity protection, and what have been the main challenges on this perspective?
All right, I start with the challenge, money. Just a little story from yesterday. We had like a biodiversity meetup, and I asked the room, we were roughly 40 to 50 people, raise your arm if you're a biodiversity solution provider, and like half of the room split up. Okay, who else is in education? Arms up. Weavers, arms up. Okay, who is a corporate that would like to maybe support these initiatives? There were not that many arms, let me tell you that. And then also, who would like to finance actually this really crucial world that we're all dependent on? One arm went up. So money is definitely the biggest challenge in our biodiversity bubble. Money is not bad, money is a tool, and we have to use it more to reward the world. And how we are really trying to shift people's mind is, a lot of the story and a lot of the narrative is still about like, it's the elephants, it's the bees, it's lovely to look at. And we need to come away from this is a nice to have to more it's a must to have. What kind of cars we drive, what kind of flats, what kind of shoes we wear, all of this really, really doesn't matter. What really matters is the base of life, and that is biodiversity, because it gives us oxygen, it gives us food, medicine, water. Everything depends on nature, so we need to shift and we need to bring more of those arguments to the people and personalize our arguments to the person that is in front of us. If it's a policymaker, if it's a CEO, if it's an artist, we can all be part of this, and we just need to speak a language so that they understand, this actually matters to me too.
Thank you. At the beginning of the session, I mentioned the Paris Agreement and its 10-year anniversary. We've had ups and downs, but nobody can deny that it was a major step in the commitment of political actors to tackle climate change. After COP16 for biodiversity last year in Cali, the realization is that there's still so much to be done to comply with the Paris Agreement for nature, as we call it, the Global Biodiversity Framework. What are your hopes and mission in this direction? Hannah, for example.
I mean, for us, the topic of a new reproductive green transition in agriculture is, of course, where we really try to work for. And the one thing that for us is so important to change is that really we stop, subsidizing also on an EU level, basically the wrong sort of agriculture on a daily basis. Basically the large growers that use monocultures, really large fertilizers, they get the money, and the small farms that really want to transition or already do things the right way, they don't. And we really need to stop that. We need to stop basically compacting and polluting soil now and try to work together with farmers to understand how can we enable you, how can we provide you with financing for monitoring and for also these 3 years, which are usually difficult to finance when you transition from conventional to green. I mean, there is this gap in yield. How can we finance that? And I think, for example, in Denmark, there was a really big revolution. They really managed for the first time on a governmental level to work with farmers to find a way where, in the short run, tax is basically reduced for farmers, and then in the long run, after 5 years, basically farmers have to pay more if they haven't transitioned in the meantime to green. So they found a way with farmers, with the community together, to work on a way to finance this transition and reward in the long run the ones that do it differently. And I think here we really need to find and sit together on a table, because there's also on a political level so much polarization in agriculture. There's the Greens against the farmers, and I feel like in general this doesn't lead anywhere, and farmers also, of course, know that for them, a long-term reproductive soil is their biggest asset. There's just so much ideology in there, and we really want to speak with different actors and try to understand how we can change that narrative, and of course really speak a lot with policymakers and get that message across. Also with the Riyadh Action Agenda, which followed the UNCCD COP last year in Saudi Arabia, which was speaking a lot about land restoration, really trying to understand how can we really mobilize these $2 trillion needed to restore 1.5 billion hectares of land till 2030. And for that we need finance from all over the place, and really trying to speak to as many people as possible and get them in the same room and try to break ideology, which is hindering, I think, everyone from creating a long-lasting change.
Thank you for that. Climate and biodiversity together also. Oliver, what's your path towards the next COP in Armenia? For biodiversity, of course.
For biodiversity, yeah. What I think I spoiled it a bit in the part before. I think we need to really put, like, if we really believe in this global biodiversity framework, which is the Paris Agreement for nature, then we finally need to give it the teeth and the claws of nature to really give it the power that is needed to build the change that we really need. And again, that is money. Like, all policy, all kind of speeches, all kind of nice action items, strategies, it doesn't matter. We need to, nature does all the services for free for us. So the least that we can do is now to protect, restore, and really make sure that we shift. Right now, 7 trillion go into harming nature from our governments, from our companies, and only 250 billion go into actually positive nature. So we shift this, and we will be so much better. We will have cleaner air. We will be abundant with life. There will be actually flocks of birds going over us. And it's all we can all realize this together. But we need to be able to say, okay, we get value out of this, so we're also happy to pay for this. I think that's, yeah.
Thank you. Alizée?
We have kind of huge expectation because we destroy so many wetlands, up to 85% for the 300 last years. But if we want to repair all that with damage, we need huge goal. I think that maybe just a key word to share with you, if we want to stay under the 1.5 limit degrees, then we have to restore 30% of all the peatlands. So I think, sorry, I will be not really original, but the main point will be to collect more funds so we can restore, preserve more wetlands. And the second one, but I think it's the most important one, maybe it's to raise more awareness on politicians, on representatives, so they can realize that we can reconcile economy and biodiversity and wetlands, and so they can realize that wetlands are part of a big ecosystem and we need them to fight against climate change and biodiversity loss.
Thank you. I'm gonna end this conversation in a panel with a personal and maybe as an entrepreneur question. You can answer as an entrepreneur, but I feel it's quite personal. I'm going to think about what Prasiddhi said at the beginning on the question of success, redefining success. I just want to hear it from each one of you in very few words, and we will end like that. If you could give us an idea of Soilytix, Wildia, Flamingo being successful solutions. They are already because they exist and you made the effort on bringing them to life. But then if you imagine them, how would it be? How would you imagine your solutions as a happy and accomplished one? Maybe Oliver?
All right, I always jokingly say, I hope my company goes extinct. The only vision that I have for the future that companies like mine shouldn't exist. And that's what I really kind of work towards every single day. I would love to just be in the African bush right now, just looking at elephants, just enjoying the scenery. I can't do that because we need to build a world that is actually works really in coexistence with all the other animals, plants, fungi, and so forth. So my ideal vision, the company I'm building right now doesn't exist because we did such a hell of a job.
Great answer. Alizée?
Yeah, during the introduction, we speak about how to learn to be best friend again with nature. So maybe it will be like to be best friend with wetlands again. And maybe I wish that Change Now 2030, you will have all the conference here speaking about wetlands.
We wish we could do that. Hannah, how about you?
For me, it would really be that everyone recognizes that the soil is alive. I mean, historically, we only looked at chemics, physics of the soil, but really it's about soil biology, and soil is the most complex, substance on human Earth. Our team comes from precision medicine, and studying blood is easy compared to soil, because it's such a super diverse mechanism that we can learn so much from. And I think getting excited about these networks, getting excited about earthworms, getting really excited about, this substance, and not calling it dirt, but really understanding this is Mother Earth. When we celebrate Earth Day, this is the basis of all. We don't want to live in a world of interstellar where we all breathe in dirt every day, like actual dirt, dead Earth. This is something that I really thrive for, that we realize this is an alive substance and we want to keep it alive.
Thank you. And we really wish you that kind of success, the one that each one of you wishes for each solution. Please, thank you, all of the three of you, for your passion first, because while preparing this session, I could really feel the fact that you are entrepreneurs, but also activists of what you're doing. Your clarity also, and the will to make part of this movement that we're having here at Change Now to put nature and the living as a priority. Please give them a warm applause. Hannah Schragmann, Alizée Ruel, Oliver Dart. We've heard words of change, how new narratives and new perceptions of the world are possible. Right now, we'll complete this biodiverse environment of change makers with our next guest, National Geographic queer photographer and environmental engineer from the Philippines. Last, but certainly not least, Gab Mejia. Please join me on stage. Sorry, it's very hot in here, so I prefer getting us fresh off the paper. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Hello, Gab, and welcome. You started quite young, this journey of photography, but your environmental consciousness was already there. Your photography is beautiful. I've seen it while preparing this. Sensitive, deep. We see a connection in there. I want to know, did you always have an eye for nature? We're going to see them all along. Where did that connection come from?
Well, being from the Philippines, I'm in a country, an archipelago. So the Philippines has like 7,600 plus islands. And, we would spend our family time in nature. My dad would bring me to the mountains, the forests. We would go to the beach, the coast. So I think nature wasn't really something that I saw was a part of us already. I realized that I am nature. And I think that moment that I had in one time when I was 13 in the mountains, my dad brought me to the tallest mountain in Malaysia, in Mount Kota Kinabalu. And it was sort of like, I don't know, a calling or like a spiritual calling that, told me, oh my God, this is it. This is the moment, I guess, that I was waiting for in a way that, to meet the mountain somehow, to meet this deep sense of time. I was there, it was raining. I was in the rainforest. There was, so much fog. and we were hiking towards the summit, but I actually didn't reach the summit. My dad, was all wet, had hypothermia, and I was like, oh, should I still continue? So I tried. I was like, okay, I'll be a rebel and be more stubborn about it and go up into the mountains. And I was like, this 13-year-old kid hiking with muddy shoes and really not knowing anything about the world, really, just like really playing and just being with it. And then, at that moment, I was like, oh no, I felt that, sense. There was the fog just engulfing the ridge. It was like granite. And that moment, that failure made me realize, this is a place where I found home. And this was something that I wanted to protect. This was something that I found that I was safe with. And, I wanted to devote my career and life to this. So I realized, even becoming a photographer, I'm nature. I'm human first before I'm a photographer, before I'm, this way of seeing the world. But I think a lot of it was really shaped by the stories that my dad, my grandmother, in the Philippines, when you cross a tree that you don't know, you would say tabi-tabi po, just to ask permission for the spirits to, to say that there's something there, that there's something beyond yourself. And I think this worldview, this view that I learned from my family and as well growing up, being with nature, I guess really just embodied it through the photograph and the art that I create. Yeah.
So family at the
family.
beginning. But well, you also studied environmental engineering, environmental justice also, then you started photography. What made you go from one to the other? And,
Yeah.
because you were already connected to nature, but then you went to academia
Yeah.
at first, and then photography?
Well, I took up university in engineering because, as an Asian, person, there's like this idea of your mom being sort of this tiger mom where you have to get all perfect A's. If you fail math, if you get a B+, you're bye-bye, you're going to another home. But I think that pressure, I learned a lot from it actually, because I realized, going to university, I also wanted to develop my passion. It just made me realize what I actually wanted to do more. I mean, environmental engineering, studying in the university, I would take my time to actually go out of the class, cut classes, hike the mountain every weekend, go to a beach with some friends, and just really, weave this idea of science. Because I've also felt like sometimes we think in polarized terms or in binaries, wherein science and art are somewhat, different fields or the different parts of the spectrum. But in reality, it's all story. I feel like the scientific method is also a story. It has, your subjects, your characters. It has a narrative. You have like the rising slope. You have your experimentation and all of that. And you have a conclusion or your result. Basically, in the end of the film, sort of the moral of the story or when you read a book. So I've always felt like science and art were just somewhat all, kind of coinciding in the idea or the language of storytelling. So I never really saw it as different, but I think environmental engineering really helped push my art further in a way that it could be credible. Working as a journalist, working in wetlands, stories about wetlands, biodiversity, documenting the climate crisis, I need to learn the facts as well. But my role as an artist is how can I communicate these facts to people who need to listen to them, to governments, to platforms, to media, international organizations. So I think it wasn't really sort of a different thing, but really just a weaving of these two different parts of the point.
And when is it that you tell yourself, I am a photographer, after you had been studying environmental engineer? Is there a moment that made you realize it, and why, why did you come to that?
I think there's not one singular moment, but if there's one photo, this photo actually I took of the Philippine eagle. So this is one of the largest endangered raptors in the entire planet, and it's found in the region of the Philippines. And there was this moment when I was taking a photo of this Philippine eagle, when I just saw its blue, brazen, and bold eyes just staring at me. And I was like, oh my God, like, how in the world, like, this beautiful creature that feels timeless, that feels like from a different time and age, still exists today. And it's here in our home, in the forests in the Philippines. And, that I felt that connection, that there was something really, really powerful to be able to show the beauty of the planet, to show the beauty of biodiversity, the things that we have and the things that we hold to lose amidst the ecological crisis that we're facing. So I realized, like, photography was this way for me to push for that, to advocate for the, animals like the Philippine eagle who may not have the voice to fight for their homes, to find the language and be able to share this language and communicate this language. So yeah, like photography was really this medium for me, this vessel for me of how I can, bring out the soul of the things that we've forgotten or the things that we, not really care to understand or take notice of.
So you had this picture, and then how did your journey as a photographer evolve? How was it that you became a National Geographic explorer?
Yeah. Well, I became a National Geographic explorer. Luckily, I was working through a project in wetlands, and it's the largest inland wetland. So if you had a time to actually walk around, there's an exhibit that we're having here called The Guardians of the Marsh, and these are the long-form story that I was working with in National Geographic, and it's documenting the climate crisis in this largest inland wetland. And this is Ate Marites Babanto. She's an indigenous woman leader who have been protecting and stewarding the marshlands for centuries. Their community, or Agusanon, means actually to flow. They're living, being with water. Their ideas and philosophies are with water and fluidity. But amidst the beauty of the wetlands, there's a lot of issues happening, like palm oil plantations, mining companies draining the wetlands, peatlands. And I was going there for about 2 years, documenting this story, really covering and investigating the issues that are happening in these places in the Philippines. Because sadly also the Philippines is one of the deadliest countries for environmental defenders in Asia, according to Global Witness. I mean, it's a challenge. We don't get to hear these stories. So like, having conservation stories, having environmental stories is really not the hot topic or like, the mainstream thing that we see in the entertainment industry or the platforms that we see in media. But yeah, I think being a National Geographic explorer, this was sort of the journey towards that. How can I utilize photography and these larger platforms in media to be able to communicate the issues that we're dealing locally?
And you're very attached to the term of retelling stories, reshaping narratives. How are you working to do that, and why that need? You could be an adventure photographer, and
Yeah.
you've gone for advocacy storytelling with your art, right? For biodiversity.
Yeah. Well, I felt like just taking photos of beautiful things doesn't really, as much as it's a balm and like, showing beautiful things, I feel that there's a certain artifice to it. And I wanted to really dig in deeper, sort of this archaeological way of seeing, I didn't really want to go to just the surface of things, but really to go underneath and the root of the issues that we're dealing with. And I think stories, one of the issues in the Philippines is actually the danger of one story, the danger of this colonial story that was propagated to us by the Spanish-American colonization period. We lived 300 years in a church and 100 years in Hollywood. And that actually shaped us. That shaped our country. That shaped the way we saw ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we exoticize ourselves. And I felt like stories actually have this power to be able to change the way we see ourselves, how we can change the narrative of how we see each other, of how we see the world and how we see beauty or different concepts of nature, of biodiversity. So I felt like my way of trying to reshaping and reimagining these narratives is to confront these narratives at the same multitude of bearing witness to the truth, is to actually apply more stories. I believe that there are more other stories out there, and the things that we just usually see in media or platforms on Instagram, it's just the artifice of things. But like real stories come from elders, from ancestors, from leaders, indigenous leaders who are at the front lines of these places. And I think that was really sort of my way of like, how can I, as a photographer, be able to challenge the dominant narratives that are being predisposed to us? Because it's like, colonial states may have gaslighted us to believing certain things about nature, about how we see ourselves. And storytelling is this powerful tool. The imagination is a powerful tool and solution as well to use it as a creative force to be able to upend this and uproot this and like, find that soil, find that root where it's diseased. Yeah.
We understand, and you've said lots of words that really touched me deep. I'll come back to that in a little while. First, I want to ask you, because I think it's related, you define yourself as a queer photographer. I would love to hear a little bit about how you relate queerness and biodiversity. Please tell us about it.
I think, nature is inherently queer. We are made to believe that the world operates in binaries, light and dark, masculine and feminine. But one thing I learned actually, I was working on this project for about 2 years, and they're the babaylans, or in the Philippines, they're called the shamans. They're indigenous women and queer shamans. And in the Filipino language, in Tagalog, we actually don't have gender pronouns. So pre-colonial views, we already had sort of a gender fluid identities. And the babaylan, which is the shaman, is a role that is multidisciplinary. It's queer. Some are healers, some are visionaries, some are astrologists, some are dancers, pastors of oral traditions. And I felt like, queerness was something Filipino, that this was something that I don't want, like, for example, the identity politics of the Western world to affect us. Like, I'm not this LGBTQIA, but like sort of this like queer, the idea of what queerness is. And then relating it to biodiversity, like, ecology is queer inherently. Like, I feel like we anthropomorphize a lot of the things that we see in nature. And that already speaks the subconscious idea of how we see ourselves as higher or beyond this hierarchy of what ecology is. So I had to unlearn this as well, because I grew up in the Philippines, and I grew up in like a private Catholic school, all boys school. In the Philippines, we don't even have divorce. It's illegal to get a divorce. So like all of these binaries in the church have really inflicted upon us. And I had to challenge that. I had to like break out from that, because that's not who I am. And I needed to find a place where I can belong, where my identity is safe, where my stories and the stories that I want to tell are safe as well. Especially now where there's erasure of identities happening with despots and leaders. For example, trans communities, marginalized communities, they're being erased off. And it's such a political power move of how stories can affect our individual identities and the way we see ourselves in the world. So being queer is like inherently being also this diversity, that realizing that diversity is such a powerful thing. And maybe that's what people are scared of. What's different, they try to use it as an scapegoat, but in truth, I think diversity is really what makes us human, what makes us connect us with nature. Because in the Philippines, we have like 110 ethno-linguistic groups. We have basically every island region would have a different language, would have different traditional attires, would have different stories, and it's really this diversity. And I think going into the future is really the new sensibility of the world is defiantly pluralistic, and we have to accept that or not in the future, because that is inherently what we're working towards for the collective endeavor of what nature and protecting biodiversity is. It's not militarized, it's not binary. Yeah.
I love this way of defining queerness, because some people may ask themselves why queerness into biodiversity, but it's perfectly explained. It's not black and white, right? And these pictures are not either. So I like the fact that you're using color for that too, even if black or white is beautiful. And I love it. And now I'm going to ask a question that it might not sound very optimistic, but then it's related to what you said before. It's close to my heart, and I like to hear your thoughts on it. You've shown us how your art and your engagement are intrinsically connected to the territory and to the peoples living in it. And then, as you said, according to Global Witness, only in 2023, 196 environmental defenders were killed around the world. I come from Colombia, the deadliest country for environmental defenders worldwide. You come from the Philippines, you just said it, where also there are staggering figures of violence against civil rights and environmental defenders. We've heard about solutions just now, and it's quite hopeful to hear people trying to solve things, but we haven't quite yet found a way to solve this violence, and you must see this very often through the lens. How do you feel about it? And I guess art might be there for that. How do you cope with the grief that sometimes you see in these situations of environmental violence?
One, I go to therapy. So therapy is really helpful from PTSD. So please, if you have trauma and the land has trauma, go to therapy. But I think more importantly, grief, there's a lot of grief actually with what's experiencing. I think we're in a world where the pace of grief is much more faster than how we grieve, how we mourn. And we've forgotten how to grieve. You know, we work on new stories, new projects, new solutions everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Like people are going into multitudes of places and pathways. But I think grief is such a powerful medicine. It's an elixir of how we can actually learn to grieve again, of what we're losing. And after a story, after documenting, for example, I documented the super typhoon in 2021 called Super Typhoon Rai, and it was the strongest super typhoon that hit the Philippines 5 days before Christmas Eve. Coastal communities, tens of thousands of people were displaced during the onslaught of the super typhoon to, you know, the climate migration and locally happening. And witnessing it, you would see the houses, people don't have food. It's been months, we were documented it a year again, and it's still the same. The things were destroyed, the communities were made to believe that they're resilient and all of these things. But I think one way that I really coped with it is that realizing that this shared struggle, this burden that we're having, is just that, I guess, affirmations to oneself that we're not alone. I think for you, being in Colombia, as much as there's violence, this violence and suppression happening with the environmental defenders, that's a struggle we also share in the Philippines, even though we're continents away. And what I always just think that maybe, you know, as much as the world is so far apart or different, or no matter how vast that we see it, and how small that we make of it, there's really that power of co-creation, the power of being able to realize that we're not alone in the shared struggle, the shared grief that we're dealing here in ecology, in the climate crisis. You know, you can cry on the shoulder of a Colombian, you can cry on the shoulder of a Filipino, and you realize that this is really the elixir or the medicine for being able to cope with hopelessness, with you know, community, care, imagination, play. These are, you know, somewhat overlooked forms of resistance against a world that makes us forget, you know.
It's funny to think that these kind of words of common grief actually gives us hope at this moment, but it's beautiful in the way you put it. We're gonna end like that. Thank you very much, Gab. We'll end this conversation here, and thank you for opening to us today and taking us through your story. These are beautiful pictures, so we invite you to go to the gallery that's just around. Please, you all, Gab Mejia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mana.
Thank you, Gab.
you.
It was beautiful. This is the end of our session. Biodiversity Solutions for a Thriving Planet. And though no one here pretends having the solution, it's the combination of all of these that are making our ecosystem stronger. Speak to each other after this session. Collaborate as much as you can. And we really hope that the work you're doing with soil and agriculture, with wetlands, forests, and biodiversity entrepreneurship keeps growing, getting to the eyes and ears of more and more people as a means not only to admire the beauty, but to make the world conscious of the urgent need to better understand biodiversity in all of its manifestations. I'm Jimena Morales Velasco, and I thank you for your attention today. Have a great and of change now.